morning, everybody. Um, where am I? Am I on the full screen?
Depends on each person's computer. If they click on full screen, you'll be there.
What? All right. I won't worry about it. Okay. Well, I think that this way of giving talks has quite a benefit for some of us, Zoom, because it's difficult for some people in the best of times to get out of their house. And on the other hand, if I no longer have to be in the same town as you are when I'm trying to give a talk, which means I don't have to get on airplanes as much as I used to. So even when we finally get a vaccine, this might be a good way to have a live talk as well as it being recorded and Zoomed at the same time. But in terms of the topic, one of the things that I've thought about and read about is what keeps us from getting in touch with the deepest part of ourself, or with the divine, or I call it God, or the presence with a capital P, is that we try too hard. First of all, we think that we have a goal that we have to get to. So we read in a book someplace and it says, you need to get rid of the false self and get in touch with your true self. So what do many of us Westerners do? We say, well, okay, the true self, that's what I'm out for. Where is it? And how will I know when I've got it? Like it's a thing, or some special experience that we're supposed to have in prayer. And so we find ourselves ever so subtly with this object in mind that is referred to as the true self. But as someone said, there really isn't such a thing. It's such an object. So stop trying to find it. And I said, well, then what am I doing with all this prayer stuff? And where am I trying to get with some of this stuff? And so I think the idea of true self is to give us a sense that this unfilled place where we are is just not working. We know that. And we want to be a better person. And so we have this goal of true self. But the true self, I think, is not so much an object that we get to, is a way that we begin to experience everyday life and the way that we experience it and then respond to it. And that's what I think contemplative prayer is trying to help us to do. In other words, it's not so much a feeling that I have during my prayer, although you may have certain a deep sense of peace, of rest, and so on. That can happen at any particular time because that's part of what the prayer can do. But more importantly is, what's the result of it? In other words, how do you live your everyday life? So I think the contemplative practice reveals its fruitfulness, its benefits, its fulfillment in a shift from what we sometimes call the false self, which is it's all about me. And it's all about me getting more security, more esteem, more power, more control. Is never enough. And you are this other who could be an obstacle to me getting my more. That begins to shift. You move away from this ego dominated by this attitude we call false self. You move beyond this ego to, you look at another person and you have a sense of compassion for them. Some people think, well, what I want to see is my sense of oneness with everything. And they think that the results of spiritual life is to see a tree and to say, I and the tree are one. I'm one with the tree. I'm not going to take a hatchet and cut down the tree. The tree doesn't get in the way of anything. I'm one with the tree. I'm one with the universe. And what I think about is, okay, you're one with the tree. How is the world a better place with you in it, being one with the tree? So I don't think it's so much trying to have a sense of oneness with the universe, although it's a oneness with the universe expressed in your reaction to another human being or another specific situation that calls for your attention. The tree may not call for your attention. It could be doing quite well. If you read the novel Overstory, it's all about trees and all the ways the trees beneath the surface of the ground are interconnecting with soil and other roots and finding nourishment and so on and so forth. The tree may be doing quite well if you let it be. But another human being may not be doing quite well if you ignore them. So I think what contemplative prayer begins to do is it changes our way that we are with other people. We begin to have a sense of compassion, which is compassio, which means to suffer with. We have a feeling for their unease, their misery, their lack of, and we sense we can make a response to that. And so we become kinder, we become more compassionate, we become better listeners, we become less selfish, more selfless. We become willing to let go instead of trying to get more for the sake of another person. And when that begins to happen, that is one of the basic ways that you know that your daily meditations are having an effect. I've heard people say to me, for instance, well, oh, Father, I get bored. My mind wanders. And I say, do you show up each day and try? Oh, yeah, I show up twice a day, Father, 20 minutes a morning and evening. I say, well, they're talking about their experience in the prayer or in the 20 minutes. Is your life changing? Oh, well, yeah, I seem to be not so angry. I seem to get less upset with so-and-so who used to rent space in my head for free. Not paying rent. I mean, in other words, I'm always thinking about them in ways that they make me crazy. And now they don't make me so crazy. I don't know what happened. The prayer. Because what I think happens in the prayer is we begin to let go of negative energies that have maybe developed throughout our whole lifetime. And are just inside of us, and that every time a situation arises, we have the same negative attitudes towards it, the same antagonistic attitude towards it. And it might come from some things that happened when we were growing up. Basically, what we learn to do is to grow up. We stop living the way we did as a child. You know, a little child, they don't get what they want. They throw a tantrum. They scream. And they get what they want. They don't know any other way. Well, you know, and you're 40 years old and you're still screaming because you're not getting what you want. You're not growing up. So I think that this contemplative practice is a way of helping us to literally grow up as well as to grow up in a more spiritual dimension. Now, another thing I think that gets in the way of our developing this deeper dimension of oneness with the divine, which will include a sense of oneness with the world around us, because the sense of God is everywhere. is one of the things that gets in the way is we miss what's right here. We're trying to get something. And one of the things I think that we miss that's so very readily available to us is silence, not stillness. Stillness we can be restless and moving around and then little gradually get still. But silence is always available if we can stop paying attention to our noisy minds and our false self-dominated ego, to just recognize it. So it's a little bit like, I think there was this fellow, it was in, I'll hold up this book, An Ocean of Light by Martin Laird. Maybe Jan can put that in the chat. Look at how skinny this book is. An Ocean of Light by Martin Laird. I think it was him. Actually, it wasn't him, it was somebody else. In any case, I'll get back to Martin Laird. The idea was, if you're in say you're in a canoe on a gently moving river, and you're spending your time focusing on your oar, your paddle, or looking around at the scenery, all of which is fine. The river is the silence. It's always there, but you don't pay attention to it. So I find, for instance, when I am going to sit down and meditate, I close my eyes, and I have my method, which is centering prayer. I just very gently call upon my word to remind me what I'm sitting here for, which is to consent to God's presence and action within. And then I just don't pay attention to my thoughts. And all of a sudden, I'm aware of the silence, especially living in a monastery, especially a monastery that's closed to the public because of COVID-19. It's really very quiet here. But often early in the morning, it was very quiet in San Francisco. And it was very quiet in Boulder, other places that I might be. And I'm aware of that silence that's there. And the silence is what helps me then to get still. In other words, silence starts, recognize the silence, and then stillness starts. I start moving around, stop moving around, trying to find a comfortable spot. And my mind stops moving around. And then, so things are getting a little deeper. And that can eventually lead to the surrender of any number of things. Surrender to focusing on my thoughts, what I'm going to do later in the day, what I should have done yesterday, what I should have, would have, and just be. And that's all that I have to do. So to recognize that silence is really quite available to us if we can just let ourselves access it. Another thing that I find gets in the way, and this is especially with people who, have a method of some sort, is they focus so much on the method. It's another one of those things we Westerners seem to do. They focus so hard on the method, trying to get themselves to the stillness and emptiness of the mind or something like that. And so they say, so I'll say, well, when you found yourself thinking of a lot of thoughts, or you found yourself focused on a thought, what'd you do? Oh, I called upon my centering word. And I just said it over and over. And I said, I think the instructions from Thomas Keating were return ever so gently, which means you don't even have to say in your mind your entire word, sacred word. You just have to reference it, maybe even the first letter, the first syllable. You just reference it. You gently. So again, it's another thing. Stop trying so hard. You're not going to get transformed by your efforts. Most of what it is showing up, showing up, showing up, showing up, and then letting the practice take over. Now, I think that what's going to then start happening, and many of us find that, is our relationship with the divine, I call God, is going to be more intimate. Now, intimacy means, in part, I'll focus this part now, is I learned to listen better. You know, we have in my tradition, it's in the little host, the Holy Communion, we call it real presence. I might get to that in a little while. Real presence is not a thing someplace that it's really present and not really present someplace else. It's not quantifiable, if you will, and it's not an object. It's a manner of being. So God is not more here and less there, because God is everywhere. And God doesn't have quantities of presence, more here, less there. But I'm still the same 160 some odd pounds here as I am there. It just sort of goes with me. But real presence means the manner in which I am present. And so I am more present as a listening entity, listening. When I was growing up, the prayers I was taught were prayers of gimme, gimme, gimme. And then there were a few that don't forget to say thank you God for the day, thank you guardian angel. But it was, yeah, okay, we throw that in, but it's mostly gimme, gimme, gimme. Give me this, give me that. And then when we don't get what we want, they say either there's no God or God doesn't care. Heck, I'm out of here. I'm not getting what I want. Well, that's not an intimate relationship. If you have a partner in your life and you're only there with the partner to get what you want, it's not going to last long unless they're very codependent or very sick themselves. So intimacy means I begin to listen more deeply. That's part of what comes with the compassion. I don't ignore. I don't walk by, as I recognize that you exist, and I'm open to listening to you rather than trying to come up with what you should say or what my answer is, and so on and so forth. So we begin to develop a relationship, and it happens in the prayer. When you're not trying to pay attention to your thoughts or your agenda or time later or in the past, in the prayer itself, you're open. Now, is he going to hear words from God? I don't know, maybe you will, but I don't think that's the point. The point is, because God's primary language is silence. I think Thomas Keating was the first one to say that I heard. Primary language of God is silence. Everything else is translation, including the Bible. So silence is God's primary language, but there'll be the intimacy, you'll find your openness to listening to God will reveal itself after the prayer very much. And because your ego's no longer dominating in the prayer. You're no longer out for your programs of happiness. In the prayer, it's not God and me. Little by little, it becomes kind of a oneness, a less duality, or is often called non-duality. But don't go after that either. Don't say, I gotta have non-duality as a thing out there. And for many of us, I think all scriptures, whatever your religion might be, or your path, Tao Te Ching, the Bible, Upanishads, sutras, they have the teachings of how to live this new life. And so, which is why I think we often read our scriptures and meditate. You know, can't read and meditate, but you might read for a little and then just sit quietly with it. Let yourself be taken into what is this thing saying to me? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is, I mean, Jesus didn't make that up. It was probably 500 years that thing has been around. But in other words, we have instructions of how to live this new life. For instance, you're listening to someone and more compassionate, and your scriptures can maybe tell you of actually what to do, what can be of some service to them. And a lot of them all agree on surrender and letting go for the sake of loving another. So I think you learn to participate more in the life of this creative force in the world. And we're not so much trying to let go. That's another thing gets in the way. We say, oh, I'm trying to let go of stuff. And I said, well, what are you letting go? For what? So that God can fill me with presence. In other words, now it's, I'm kind of a bottle or a jar. And I don't feel I don't feel very good. I don't feel I don't feel some divine force or whatever you think that. And so if I meditate, my jar will get filled up. I'll get filled up and I'll feel better. And again, it becomes just another object. What we believe is the presence is already within us. It's already here. We're one with the divine. It's part of being created. We're one with the universe in that sense, but we're not aware of that. And we're not aware of differences and multiplicities. But this presence, if you will, this dynamic power is already within us. The problem is we don't recognize it. And because we don't recognize it, we also can't access it and access its power for good in the world. So stop trying so hard to let go. If you just show up, you know, that's a lot of it. Just show up and have your method, do what you can do in that time, but don't be looking for some kind of result, because that's just you taking over control and power. So it's that this false self-ego will just almost naturally begin to lose its power, that sense of being separate from, and what comes with this separate from is we're separate from ourselves, our very goodness, and then we want to become someone else. I wish I had known this. This is a great answer. Someone says when you're younger, what will you be? What do you want to be when you grow up? And I think it was Keating said, me. I want to be me when I grow up. I want to be the best that I'm made to be. That's the real me. I don't want to be this false me, which is me trying to be somebody else because I don't like who I am. As we develop a deeper spiritual life, we'll recognize our basic goodness and try to live it out. So I have to recognize okay, so we're in COVID times, right? And if I'm just this priest trying to give talks, make a little bit of a living so that I can pay my bills and send some money to the Paulist Fathers and all, I might say, well, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm doing nothing, blah, blah, blah. Because I have seen myself as some sort of economic entity or this producer of something. And instead of just recognizing, which I often do, and just in my prayer, I'm just fine. And as Julian of Norwich said, all things are well, all things will be well. And we might say, well, they don't seem too well now, but there's a deeper sense of wellness that is always available to us in some of the worst possible times. So we don't have to try to be someone else. We don't have to try to do anything. Let our best self be revealed to us. I think, especially in my tradition, this power is called love. And love's a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a thing. It's an energy. It's an activity. So the divine for me is love. And love will reveal the best of myself if I just try not to be so much in control. And so, as is often said, all I have to do is nothing. And let God do all the work. So let go of your self-conscious motivation. Now, I know in the beginning when people start doing this contemplation is a gift, but at least you start meditating. You want to get something. Now, that's kind of normal for us. You want to get something, but that's why you try to learn more and more to study it, so that you find out, well, let's not try so hard anymore. Let's let God do the work. Isn't that great? In a relationship in which God's going to do all the work. So we're not trying so much to be empty, letting go. What's empty? Empty of what? We think of empty as nothingness. I'm totally unaware of thoughts. Well, you're not totally unaware of thoughts because you're aware of no thoughts. So emptiness is not nothingness. It's openness. So it's not as if we're not just trying to have a feeling or a numbness in our meditation, is we're trying to be open to everything and everyone. Not at that moment, but when we go out into our daily lives, becoming more an open person to our own goodness and to the hidden goodness that's in other people. We often say in the monastery, it's a school for love. In other words, now I'm a monk. I'm a monk, living monkish life. The monks are actually living together. Maybe they don't talk so much as out in the world, but they talk plenty. But they know one another. They get to know one another. They spend enough time together. And everybody has, edges. And so you get to practice not loving perfect, saintly people, but you get to practice loving, which a lot of it is acceptance of the way people are, of letting people be, of then trying to live a good example that others may pick up on. So that can all be, stuff that you can do. Now, another thing that I think gets in the way of our meditations, of just our openness to the divine, much less in meditation, is the cell phone. The cell phone. You think of your cell phone, many of us, not all, but many of us, it's right there. It's not too far away. Obviously, mine's right on my desk. So, and you get a little text message. Oh, what's that? So often we're open little text messages, little bings we have go off on our phone when an important message comes on, and so on and so forth. Well, God, who is always with us, always within us, might be, that means every present moment is a God moment, is a presence moment. And those moments are text moments, if you will. And are we as open to God in each present moment as we are to our cell phone? And most folks would say, no, not really. Okay, this is where we are. But so cyberspace and Wi-Fi and all that is beginning to teach us that God is always messaging us, and maybe we pick up a few of it here and there. It's what I think what begins to happen is we move from where I've got my 20 minutes or half hour or 45, whatever it is, 45 minutes of meditation. I do that. Then I get up and I go in my world, and I hope that I'm a nice person. And maybe I'll be more nice than less nice. Who knows? But what begins to happen is this divine power, this relationship, this intimate relationship begins to be background that we're always aware of. It's as if it's always in the back of our mind, as we sometimes say, or it becomes more and more something we're aware of. We're walking along and we notice a flower that's blooming. And we say, I didn't see that yesterday. Well, yesterday when you walked by, you were full of yourself and your thoughts and your anxieties and your worries and your false self trying to get more and more of this. Today, because you've got this sort of spiritualness, your spiritual DNA, if you will, is now more empowered. And you begin to see things around you and say, and I sometimes say, it's a God moment. That flower's a God moment. The way that the leaves are blowing on the trees, it's a God moment. It's just you begin to have a certain peacefulness, and then you run into some person right after that, and you make a really good response to them in whatever their situation is, which may not be so whatever. So that person may be that you ran into may also be a way that God is texting me. In other words, this person becomes not an obstacle to me getting what I want, my more, but the person becomes an opportunity for me to enjoy the intimacy with the divine through my relationship with that other person. Often people will say in recovery meetings, for instance, Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, or Al-Anon, or overeaters or gamblers or whatever, that because they're practicing their steps, which includes the 11-step meditation, that they have a better response to a person in the room than they would if they weren't. The person in the room no longer is an obstacle to be avoided or ignored because they're not going to give me the more that I want, and they become an opportunity to be of service, is often what they say, to be of service. And so you can take that attitude, you walk around saying, how can I be of service to the world around me? Not a bad way to start out the morning. Or if you can always start the day over again anytime. So it could be that this person is God's way of texting us that we run into. But if we're prejudicial, if we have false pride, that is, I'm better than this person, I ignore them, or we're so absorbed in myself that I just don't even recognize their need, their presence. I just find that I have a whole different day and way with people around me and situations around me when I am centered in my heart, if you will, my heart place. But as long as I'm focused on my cell phone, I'm in touch with a different world. And so what I need to do is to keep getting doses of meditation. That's why I like to do something in the morning and something in the evening. And here at the monastery, I do. And of course, it's a life very conducive to that in many ways. But I need a couple of doses a day to keep the lines open, sort of the divine cyberspace, to keep it open to God, in whose presence I always am. often revealed in another person, place, or situation. And my response to that, if it goes well, is the fruit of my meditation. Even while I'm submitting to some difficulties and duties that might be happening, the person is not getting in the way of my accomplishing tasks. They are not an obstacle, but they are just, I'm trying to get things done, and here's a situation. Maybe I have to put something down for a minute to attend to them. That sort of thing. I lose a sense of negativity about anything that is not part of my agenda for the day. So what I think is happening, another thing that I think is happening in the prayer itself, when it really gets deep, that's the contemplative moment. And I believe that's a gift. You can't make yourself a contemplative. I've heard other people say that. It's God who decides you're going to have this deep moment. What's that going to look like? A deep moment is where there's no sense of time. You know, science, for instance, says before the Big Bang, if you're in the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, there was no time because there's no motion. Without motion, you don't have time. Time and motion go together, all right? So you get taken so deep into the prayer, it's as if there's no motion. You're so still in your heart center that there's no sense of motion, so there's no sense of time. Well, how does that reveal itself? So you hit your little cell phone for 20 minutes. That's how you keep your time, let's say, or your timer. And all of a sudden, bing, it goes off. You have no sense of that 20 minutes passing. In other words, it was timeless. But of course it was timed. It was ticking away on your device. But your awareness of it is zilch because you have been taken so deeply into yourself. And when that happens, that's a peace beyond all understanding, but it can carry you quite a bit through the day. The problem is you like it so much you want to get it again. You know, you don't want to become addictive to it. I gotta have it because the next time you sit, you can be bored to death. Why does that happen? Well, maybe to see if you're going to show up. How unconditional is your commitment? How intimate? A real intimate love means an unconditional love, which means you're going to stay with your partner even when you're sometimes bored. Well, no, God's your partner, if you will. So you let go of this thinking mind, or you're taken so deep in yourself that you're not even aware of the thinking mind, which is just thinking plenty of thoughts just as your clock is tick-tocking, but you're not aware of it. You know, the Buddhists, they recognize a sixth sense. You know, we have 5 senses, a sixth sense. They call it the thinking mind, and it's problematic. So that's why we're often told, let go and let God. Well, it's hard to let go. That's why we have methods so that we thus pay less attention. Thoughts will continue, but thoughts are not our problem. Attachment to thoughts are our problem. People are not so much our problem. It's our attachment to outcomes that are our problems. We will begin, it's another way that changes, is we will begin to not feel in charge of the results when we reach out to be of service to another person. When we try to be loving, you know, what happens is I'm trying to be loving because I want to get something. I'm trying to be loving because if I'm loving, you'll be nicer and then I'll get what I want. That's not it. It's unconditional love. You're not attached to the results because you don't control the results. You're only attached to your response. So you begin to, I've often used this idea. You think that you're not going to have any negative thoughts anymore. No, you may still have all kinds of thoughts and feelings of unforgiveness, of unkindness. They pop into your mind. A situation arises, a person shows up, and bing, you immediately have a thought with some energy to it. But what begins to change is you don't let that energy control your response to the situation of the person. So you're aware of being somewhat feeling of detachment or anger, but you let just a little bit of something get in the way. Just give yourself a moment and a new energy comes. And I think that new energy comes from your meditation. I'll go about 5 more minutes and then we're going to take a little break, let everybody go to the bathroom. You all have your private bathroom, so we don't have to stand online. So I think that's what happens. You make a different response. Now, it could become eventually to where you don't have any more of those, what we call negative feelings. But it's how you respond. You're not in control of every energy or thought that comes into your mind or every feeling. They're just there. But we are not attached to them such that they control our response. So what you're learning in your meditation is detachment, letting go, and that will begin to take over in your everyday life. You get this background sense that you're always in the presence of God, and you begin to see God in the world around you somehow. It's a different attitude. So you stop making efforts to remain in the presence of God, and you more let things come. You let things come to you in the present moment. You don't try to control it. And this will all come from, I think, the prayer. You begin to let this divine source, this power, take over more and more of your responses to the world around you. Because there's a lot of complicated situations. We've got this COVID thing that's going on right now, okay? And there's a certain amount of fear about it, which I think is real. And you continue to practice your prayer, and you do the practical things that you need to do, but at the same time, you don't let your whole life be controlled by fear. And you learn to have a nice balance. For instance, people say, I can't get together with anybody anymore. How am I supposed to be responsive to people? How am I supposed to be kind and loving? Well, I think the post office is still at work. I think they still sell stamps. And I think you can still write letters. I think you can take this same cell phone and you can call somebody up on it and say, how are you? I mean, I can go outside the monastery, ride about 7 or 8 miles where I can get a cell phone signal, and I can sit there and I can call up one of my relatives and say, how are you doing? How's your day going? How's things around you? What's going on in your life? And so on and so forth. Or I'm trying to use Sundays to write some letters. So you say, where's my letter, right? Give me a chance. So there's ways, and it'll come to you more naturally. And you just become this better person without trying so hard to become a better person. And you begin to let go of your failings. That is, we have failings, but you don't beat yourself up over the head. You're aware of them, and you say, God, they're yours. Let me just do the best that I can. And that is part of what surrender is. Surrendering the past that you can't change. Lord, I can't change that. I'm in your hands. Do with me as you will. So I think we're going to take what do you think, Jan, about 5 minutes? How long does it take to go to the bathroom? All
10,
right.
15 minutes.
All right. Let's say 10. Let's say 10 minutes. But you don't have to just sit there. One of the things, you don't have to keep looking at the screen. You can still hear me. You can turn away, because it's a lot easier looking at a person than looking at a computer or a cell phone. But the other thing is, it gives you, we're going to have Q&A, and we're going to have a 15-minute meditation set as well. Mm-hmm. So if you know how to use chat, you can put your Q&A, your question, on the chat. And then we'll take a look at that and see what we can answer. Or when we go to Q&A, I'll say, you can raise your hand. There's right now 41 people. I hope that Jan can figure out who's raising their hand. And then
Are you going to take questions right now, or are you going to wait till later to take them?
No, we're going to take our 10-minute break
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Boom. See you at 11 o'clock. Oh, I'm not going anywhere, but all right.
While we're in the break, a couple things. I did put up the Venmo account for Terry, Venmo.com, and then it's at Terry-Ryan-25, or snail mail to Terry Ryan, St. Benedict's Monastery, 1012 Monastery Road, Snowmass, Colorado. And for those of you who just came on, I'll put it in chat right now.
It's 81654 is the zip. Oh, you got it up there.
81654, and here it is again. How's that? So, yeah. And then meditation's coming up in a little bit. We have a little Beethoven playing in the background.
All right. I will, I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Okay, what's next?
What's next?
Yeah.
Uh, oh, here's a chat. Let me see. Blah, 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 blah. We are taking a break. No, no, that's not.
I don't see any questions yet. Are you ready to take questions? Is that it?
No, well, I don't want to just go from them
Okay.
coming back to sitting, but I might talk a few more minutes just to segue into sittings. I'll do the time for the sit. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure
I've
thing.
got that on my. Normally, I would do 20 minutes if it was live, but given that they're on the screen and all, they got a very easy chance to walk away and forget to come back. So
Right.
I'll do 15 minutes.
We are recording this, Terry. So if you have a Google a YouTube account, we can put it up on there, or we can put it up on my YouTube account, whichever you want, which would probably be the easiest way for people to see this later.
Put it on yours.
Either whichever whatever you want. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm easy.
I may, but I can't even remember where it is. So let's just do yours. You're more up with it. As long as they have how to, because I'll get 2 or 3 emails saying, why don't you put it on YouTube? And I said, we did. And they said, I can't find it. So this way we'll be able to tell them, here's the number you go into or whatever.
So we'll put it on later and then send you a text, and then you can email, or someone can email everybody and let them know where it is, and it can be passed on.
Yes, I'll put it on my Facebook page after I get it from you.
Okay,
And
sounds
I'll
good.
send it to a couple of relatives or something like that. I'll get the, yeah, I got a couple of some older people and then some Facebook people. You know, it'll be fine.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good.
Not to worry.
All right.
Yeah, YouTube, I think. I think I set up a YouTube a long time ago, and then you say, what's your password? I say, God, no, I don't know.
Right, that always
But
happens.
I rely on you to just take care of all those things. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. We're back. Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. You've had your chance to get your, well, I guess if you're on the East Coast, you've had lunch. But who knows where you are. In the West Coast, you're still having your mid-morning coffee. And I guess after it's all over, I'll hear from people either from on email or Facebook or whatever that you actually heard this talk. It is being recorded, and it's going to be on YouTube. And Jan will set it up, and then he'll send me the YouTube Connect, and then you can get in touch with me, or I'll put it on my Facebook page. I'll give it to Mary Baumgartner. And those people who weren't able to watch or really want to hear it a second time, that would make my ego very large. But I'm just going to talk a couple of more minutes, and then we're going to do a 15-minute meditation. The only common denominator, well, since you're at home and Jeff will mute you, you can make all the noise you want, but because we're not going to be able to hear you. And I'll keep the time for 15 minutes. But just as you're getting back to your seat, because if we start right away with the meditation, then you get back and say, I don't hear anything. What happened? My computer broke. So I'll just dabble a little bit in that word sin, or something that a lot of us are aware of, no matter what faith or non-faith we have, is the idea of original sin. We hear the say original sin. And some people jump in, the Adam and Eve thing, and so on and so forth, that mythical story of the Genesis in the Hebrew scriptures. But here's a way to think about sin in terms of our spiritual development and a more contemplative practice. It's a lack of personal evolution. I don't mean evolution in terms of becoming human over the last 35,000 years, whatever it's been. I mean your own personal evolution. I mentioned this earlier, that we, as children, we have certain, because we feel powerless, or we just haven't learned how to be adults because we're not adults. You sort of fear the monster in the closet, so to speak. We have certain ways that we respond to life from physiological development that maybe help us feel a little bit better at that early age. The feeling, the need of, I hear this a lot from school children, the need to feel part of a group. And so you begin to dress like the group and talk like the group and have manners like the group that you want to be part of. But that may not really be you. But that's not your issue at that moment. But eventually, you've got to stop trying to be like everybody else, because you're a unique person. Now, I don't mean unique in the worst possible sense, you're just so special. But God made you to be just you. And there's no other one to be exactly like you. And for your purpose in this world as you're going through it in our short lifetime. So what you want to be, as I said before, when I grow up, I want to be me. I want to be the best that I am made to be. And so that whole idea of sin is acting like someone you're not, or acting childish when you should be more of an adult kind of a person. It's an emotional programmatic response to the world around you. It's trying to find happiness in ways that are no longer going to work. Not everybody can have all the security, esteem, power, and control that they want. It just isn't going to be. If you continue to act in this old way, you really have to realize you are not acting out of free choice. You're not free. You're controlled by this old way, which we call the false self as you begin to grow up. One of the shifts that will take place is you move, because of your contemplative practice, you move from things must be, I have to have, things ought to be, to where you have preferences rather than musts. I prefer things Uh, you begin to talk as this is my opinion, as opposed to this is the way, which is often in the childish person, my way. And my way is to make me feel better, which is more power, control, esteem, security. Okay? And so some people spend a lot of their time and energy, and we see it in our Western culture, trying to get more wealth, more power, more knowledge, become more famous. And what it really covers up is how weak and powerless we actually are. We're all going to die. And often have this image of some rich person lying on their deathbed realizing they're not going to beat death and they can't make themselves feel better. And we really don't have as much power as we think we have. So why not get an acceptance of who you are a little bit earlier in life than your deathbed? That is, in some ways, and we're not all that important in the world scene, and yet we're very important to the presence, to the divine, to what I know as God. So it's okay for me to be a nobody to the world around me, which I very much am now, because I'm never a nobody to those who love me, and especially to God. So I don't have to become anyone because I'm already me. And that really is enough, and just keep working on me each day. And I may miss the mark. I may drift back into sin. Keating, I think, uses the idea of the practicing archery. Well, you take the bow and arrow and you aim at the target and you miss. So what do? Walk away and say, well, I missed, that's it. No, you take another one, you try again. And then maybe someone shows you how to do it better, shows you some skills. That's part of growing in archery. We're trying to grow in life. So there are many failures in learning to do it right. We sort of reduce our mistakes little by little as we reduce the obstacles that we place in the way to divine union, many of which I've talked about: trying to get something, looking for the true self, failing to notice the silence that is all around us, using our methods as the focus of our prayer, and so on and so forth. So that gives us a chance now to actually do our meditation. So I'm going to take my little device and going to avoid looking at breaking news and just go, just because there's it's always breaking news, right? It's always breaking us something. And I have my little centering prayer app, and I'm going to set this for 15 minutes. All right. And so my suggestion is now get yourself in your comfy position so that you're not paying attention to your body and how you feel. And you have whatever your method is, could be noticing your breath. All we're trying to do is our method is only for the purpose of beginning to not pay attention to our thoughts. Whenever you find yourself focused on a thought, don't get upset. Just call upon your method ever so gently. If it's a breath, just notice gently your breathing. That's to remind you of why you're in this, to be consenting to the presence, the power in the moment, in you. Begin. When you're ready, please just open your eyes if they were closed, and we'll go on. Okay. Before I forget, I was going to mention a couple of books that I think you might enjoy. Some of you might enjoy. I mentioned The Ocean of Light by Martin Laird. That's in the chat room, and I think you might like that. I think he's very sensible. Martin Laird, I believe, teaches at Villanova, if I have it right. So he's the current guy, yeah. Professor of Early Christian Studies at Villanova University. And this particular book of Ocean of Light, we listened to last summer. What happens at the monastery is that what we call vigils starts at 4:30 in the morning. I know, that's not easy. You don't have much nightlife here. So we're up 4:30 in the morning, and we read a page a day out of a book on some spiritual dimension. And the book, one of the books we read last summer was An Ocean of Light by Martin Laird, and I'd be listening to it each day. You know, you get kind of a page, a thought, and I says, so I got hold of the book myself, and it's very, very good. Another one for those of you who are big into centering prayer, you may have heard of somebody called Cynthia Bourgeault. And that's called The Heart of Centering Prayer. She talks about the heart center, not the bump, bump, bump beating heart, but it's something that's been talked about in circles of prayer for centuries. She didn't make it up. But she has a lot to say about centering prayer and just about prayer in general. But she references, without so much, she references somebody who used to live in Boulder, Ken Wilber. I think he lives in Denver now. I think he's still alive. Any case, he wrote a tome. See, this book is not very, he wrote a tome, The Future of Religions, I think, and it's 750 pages. It's not an easy read, so I'm not holding that one up. But she references part of it, and it's how we kind of grow in our spiritual dimension. And I think one of the things that Ken Wilber, and then she, I believe, repeats it or uses it, is think of the Russian doll. What the heck's that? Well, you might have seen it where you see this wooden doll, and you lift it up, and inside there's a smaller doll, and inside that a smaller doll, smaller, to get down to the smallest one. The idea being is that we don't so much give up a part of ourselves. That is, we still have, we always were children, but in which we live at a certain level of life, a certain stage, if you will. So we can have spiritual experiences, which are states, moments, but we live in certain, we develop growing stages in which we sort of hold on. We have part of what we used to be, but we build and we build and we build, and it sort of never ends. Anyway, she does a nice job of that. And so I thought that was a good read. And if you, I'll mention one more, just one more. Contemplativeoutreach.org apparently is putting out some little books. Now, this is a really thin book. And it's a book it's by Thomas Keating. It's about things he said, but I think he was dead. He died about a year and a half ago. But Contemplative Outreach put out this book about things that he said called That We May Be One, and Christian non-duality. And I think you have to get it. I don't know that you can get it on Amazon. Probably contemplativeoutreach.org. You make a few more bucks if you get it from them. Anyway, so we'll let it stay at that. I am working on another book, but I'll give another talk down the road. So now, anybody want to wave a hand if you have a question? Jan's looking. Jeff's looking. No? Okay.
Or you can shout out your question. Just unmute yourself and ask it.
All right. Well, then I'm going to go on a little bit more, and we'll do another check on some questions a little bit later on. We have talents and gifts. In other words, I hope I have talents and gifts, but I don't want to become attached to them. That is, I have to use my talents and my gifts, and if I don't, I'm a failure, or I'm not fulfilling who I really am. We have talents and gifts, and we use them as best we can when we can. So, in other words, we have this COVID time, and the first thing that came to me was, I can't teach anymore because we can't have gatherings. And somebody would say Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom, what do you mean, a fast car? What are you talking about? But thanks to people like Jan Scott, who made it, how should I say, easy for dummies. Zoom for Dummies by Jan Scott. And I found out how to get on the app. It's Zoom app, and it's free. So I just thought it was going to be so difficult because technology overwhelms me. That's not my talent. And now I've seen how Zoom can really allow me to still do things that I do, but not in quite the same way. So it's not quite the same, but I can still do some things. And I can do them from the monastery, where I only used to teach once a year at the monastery, and that was at the retreat house. Now I can probably do things once a month, and I'll talk to Jan after it's over and see if we want to do another one at the end of July. If we do, we'll let you know, and so on and so forth. But you don't want to be attached to your talents, and you don't want to always be out for rewards. I think of, my mentor is Jesus of Nazareth, okay? So where'd he end up? Well, as far as non-believers are concerned, he ended up dead on a cross. And he had a lot of talent, but he had much more of love. He was unconditional love and acceptance, and exhibiting it in that fashion of not trying to beat people up or destroy them, but forgiving, and people who didn't understand him, didn't accept him. And he died young. I mean, I would say young, 33. And I thought, wow, he could have done so much more, and so on and so forth. That's what it is to take up your cross. In my tradition is don't be so attached to rewards, or for that matter, even to seeking enlightenment. That's another thing. I think the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita says that, is that you're missing the boat if you seek rewards, even if you seek enlightenment. So that becomes, people say, I want to be enlightened. They meet somebody who they consider kind of a guru or a good example, and they say, oh, wow, I want to be just like that person. They're an enlightened person. Whatever that is. Well, the enlightened person doesn't take enlightenment so seriously, and they may not quite see themselves like that. But we don't want to be somebody else. We want to be who God made us to be. So I don't want to be Thomas Keating, for instance. I want to be Terry Ryan, the best of what Terry Ryan is, and that's continuing to evolve. And I'm not a young man anymore. So I don't want to be attached to spiritual consolations or ecstasy. If you read in some of these journals or books about people who have had extraordinary spiritual experiences, we might say, levitation, for instance, visions. Uh, well, a person who is quite evolved in the spiritual journey doesn't take that. They just say, oh, it's a passing thing. In other words, so they levitate it, big deal. The real issue is, how are we in our everyday life? Therese of Lisieux, she died at 24. I mean, she's pretty evolved. 24, I was very much a jerk. And at 24, she's dead from tuberculosis. But she practiced the little way. It's a great way to live. It's making a response to the world as best as we can with what love we can conjure up in our heart at the moment. So we see somebody who we know doesn't like us. We don't avoid them. We don't snarl at them and give them a bad look, as we say. We might smile at them as they walk by. Does it change them? Not at all. They don't change one bit. It changes me. The little way is to change myself. So if I'm attached to spiritual consolation, just more things for me. I want to feel better. What you want is to be fully evolved and loving as best as you can, rather than trying to get things like enlightenment or non-duality. So it's more of here's another way that we surrender. We surrender trying to have a result in our prayer, because that's just another form of control, trying to have a result. You do the same things over and over and over. I think of it in terms of running. I still jog. At 8,000 feet, it barely looks like jogging, but I think I'm jogging. It doesn't feel like walking, but I'm sure a fast worker could walk right by me, could go by me. So, but I don't go out each day like I used to. I got to be better today than yesterday, or I have a goal. I have to beat somebody. Now I just go out and do it. And I do whatever I can do. I just feel that if I do something like this exercise on a regular basis, I'll be healthier and I'll enjoy it more. It won't become so difficult. But there'll be days when it's boring. There'll be days when it's windy, days when it's cold or it's hot or something like that, or I didn't get a good night's sleep. But I still do it. And I'm not trying to get something. I'm just doing it because this is part of who I am. I've always been a jogger. So you develop a little bit of humility. You stop trying to beat people. Stop trying to be better than others. I want to be holier or get better or not like that person. And we really are powerless to evolve ourselves into the best that we are. But we can become the best what we are through this deeper meditation. It's not a self-help program. It's not something you do all on your own. And it's not so much that you practice certain directions. I mean, we have our scriptures. For me, I have my gospels. I have the Hebrew scriptures. You can tell me how to live. But I have to have an energy and a power to do it. You know, love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Do unto others, have one do unto you. Yeah, well, that's the direction, but I can't do it. I got no energy, no power. I get that through the meditation. So a little bit of humility. It's not a self-help program. I can do this all by myself, all right? We are basically good people. If I can get up in the morning and say, no matter what feeling I get up with, no matter what bad behavior I practiced yesterday, I'm basically a good person who made a mistake or failed at something yesterday. Yesterday's gone. It's over. I can't change it. But I'm basically a good person because I have a spiritual DNA, if you will. And many people in my tradition feel that this part of us, our spiritual DNA, has always existed. It's existed from the beginning of creation, if you will. It's just that at this point, I've been put in, that my spiritual DNA became Terry Ryan. in the world. And my interior transformation is to access that good spiritual DNA, so that I see reality with an inner eye. Or as somebody, a guy named Chamberlain wrote in Alcoholics Anonymous, he wrote a book, I think, A New Pair of Glasses. I remember that book, A New Pair of Glasses. And it's seeing the world in a different way. It's a way of seeing reality as a sort of restructured me. You know, I tried to structure myself by myself or get structured by the society around me, but I didn't try to build a structure from within. And so by doing that, or allowing it to be done to me by this divine power, I get freed from a false self-system, which a lot of which was fear-based. I did a lot of things fear-based, tried to avoid certain things and get certain things. And fear has a tremendous amount of energy. And in some cases, it's a good thing. Don't gather in large groups close together without masks and so on and so forth in COVID. But that wasn't the fear I was about. It was just a lot conjured up. So there's a sense of my basic goodness, and which means basically I'm already in union with the divine because that's the way I was made. But I'm not aware of it. And I become aware of it little by little through this prayer. And what falls away is when I'm not aware of it, when I have a sense of a distance from peace, you might call it, or I might say, I just don't feel close to God. But they say you're not a believer. You don't feel comfortable in your own skin. And when that happens, we tend to have an insatiable desire for pleasure, possessions, power. And they're really the sugar highs of the interior life, the sugar highs of the heart-centered life, as Cynthia Bourgeault would say in her book, The Heart of Centering Prayer. And you can't live off of sugar. It's a high, but it passes, and it's not healthy. Too much of it's not healthy. And what we want is too much pleasure, possessions, and power. And it's not going to fill us up correctly. We need sort of spiritual protein, if you will, or a much more balanced diet. We are, we're always in the present moment, but sometimes we live in another moment. We conjure up the future and we go there. We do this in fantasy. Now there's planning for the future, but I think when you're structured healthily, a healthy structure spiritually, you plan for the future realistically, having a true sense of yourself. But fantasy relives the past, but in a way in which you look much better and you don't make mistakes, or you live the future as a person that's not really you. So we want to become myself as I am, and trying to have a fuller life. So if you think of something like personal, we hear the word personal sin. Personal sin. Think of it this way for the moment. Personal sin is a neglect, deliberate neglect of our genuine needs and the genuine needs of others, not the wants of others, not the wants of a selfish other person, but the genuine needs of another person and my own genuine needs. And it's the deliberate neglect. Now, if it's not deliberate, you're clueless. And I wouldn't call that a personal failure, a personal sin. It's when it's deliberate, when you're doing these things deliberately and you're saying, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do. I remember when I was growing up, I don't want to say this is what the nuns and priests said. I only want to say this is the way I interpreted it, because I was a kid and I probably had some issues and so on and so forth. But the way we interpret things is the way we grew up with them. And my relationship to God, there was a God, and there was a God because my parents said there was, and because the nuns and priests that I respected, because I was told I was a Catholic. I was baptized as a baby. And so I took all this in, but the God was a reward and punishment God. And it was a God that could leave me if I was personally bad, personal sin, and a God that would come to me if I do the right thing, like confess my bad deeds, and then come to me in Holy Communion. So God came and went. God was not always within me, but came and went, and I had control. I could control God by my actions. And if I was good enough, I could get to heaven, but probably being an Irish Catholic kid from the Bronx, that's most unlikely, a boy. Girls, maybe they got a better chance, but not me. So I was going to do time in purgatory, a lot of it, probably. But this is the way it was. But an adult spirituality is based upon divine love, which is unconditional. And I've come to realize God doesn't go away and come back. I read once when I was, it was my spiritual experience, and I was, I think, 27. I was 27 at the time. And I decided to find out if I was going to be a Christian. And I was thinking, well, why don't I read the Gospels? I at least knew they existed. I had 16 years of Catholic education. I've been hearing them in church, but I never read them really, one after. So I just picked up Matthew because it was the first book of the Gospels. And I get to chapter 11 because I said I would just read it and stop and think about what made sense. And if it didn't make any sense, I go on to the next thing. So I come to me, all you who are burdened, and find life difficult. My yoke is easy, my burden light. I'll give you rest. I said, wow, come to me. I'm burdened. Come to you just as I am, not squeaky clean. It was, I probably heard it before, but that was the moment to me. And I said, that's the God I want. I don't have to be perfect to come to this God. That was my experience of unconditional love and acceptance. And that's when I began to move away from the God that I was taught as I was a little kid. Now, there was more to it than that. So God said, okay, come to me just as you are, and I'll love on you, and take my yoke upon you. It's very gentle, but my yoke is to lead you unto what now what I got to become unconditionally loving and accepting of people who is as big a jerk as I was when I was 27 years old. And the people with whom I live, the people with whom I work, the people that I see on a regular basis, those are the ones where I need to practice this especially. I don't have to go looking. They're right around me. So little by little, I developed this spiritual friendship with God in which I can feel more comfortable accepting and myself as God reveals myself. It's sort of a self-disclosure. Do you ever get a sense of, I don't know if you might be with somebody, this happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, by the way, in the 5th step. It's where you write out all pretty much the mess of your life, okay? All your resentments and all your sexual innuendos and your fears and so on and so on. Then you tell somebody and you think they're going to call the cops on you or reject you. And you find out that they accept you in your most honest self. Well, that's a God moment. God knows us completely. The thing is, we don't know ourselves. But as we begin to realize the depth of our messiness and find out that God's very accepting and very loving and isn't ready to hit me over the head. It's not a reward punishment. It's that by realizing, and God will reveal what we don't even know about ourselves that needs work through contemplative practice. It'll come up because in that silence and stillness, if you would call it the unconscious, if you went to Jungian, the unconscious, where stuff is buried, comes up, and we can take a look at it and see it, not so that we can feel horrible and terrible, but so that we can see what God sees and realize that we're still loved, and let some of it go and do something about some part of it. And that brings a lot of happiness. There's a lot of good to be said in honesty. And being honest with God prepares us to be honest with others. And sometimes honesty with others prepares us to be honest with God. So we learn to let go of our past rather than feel filled with shame and guilt. It is so freeing to be free of shame and guilt. So little by little, we'll develop a better person where our goodness becomes fuller. It's partial and then less partial. Each stage of our human development builds on previous stages. And it'll happen little by little. So another thing I hear about, and we might get towards the end of this, is solitude. People think of solitude as being by themselves. Well, you can't always be by yourself. That would be an obvious place of solitude, to be by myself. In some place where there is nobody else. But think of it now as not primarily a place, but an attitude. An attitude of total commitment to this relationship that I'm discovering in my contemplative practice. That is a focused, I'm totally committed to this each day. It's not, I'll pray when I get time. I'll pray later. There's no such thing as later in contemplative prayer. You say later, the world will overwhelm you and you'll not get to it. You'll get that night and say, I didn't do any prayer today. What happened? Where'd that go? Well, one task after the other and so on and so forth. So, but if you say, I am committed to this relationship because I'm unconditionally loved, why would I not want to have something of that? And I will be my best self. I will be happier at a deeper place. I might have less stuff and less things going my way, but they may be things that really weren't all that important anyway. So it's an attitude of total commitment to this relationship. And that's solitude. It's me and the divine who are one. We're really one. And it's often we say, we're divine. Well, I'm not God, but in a sense, I am God. Well, how can be not God and God? Well, when you get into a deeper dimension of the spiritual life, these things begin to make sense. Not on an intellectual basis, but on some deeper level. And we develop this surrender, develops a certain amount of letting go, or poverty. No, poverty sounds like a terrible word. Think of it this way, a non-possessive attitude towards everything. I'm not trying to possess another person. I'm not trying to get something that I must have. It's a non-possessive attitude, starts out as an attitude, that also then gets replaced with a sense of unity, of oneness with everything at the same time. So it's an interior freedom that allows us to have much or little. It doesn't make any sense. We're just basically at peace with the presence of our own powerlessness, left to our own devices, our own powerlessness to change the world out there and in here, but in collaboration or in accessing that union with God that is always there. Something in us dies and something comes to life. We call it death and resurrection in my particular world, or a risen life. And a lot of that requires the cross. What, like the thing there with the hands spread out? No, the cross of everyday practicing. Even when you're bored, even when your mind is just seems going everywhere and you can't let go, and so on and so forth. And even when you call other people, they're crossing my life and they're there. Those are all ways we're letting go, not trying to be in control, not trying to be the huncho, the spiritual, the center of things. We're dying to an old way, and we're living not to just a new way, but to our truer selves. Well, I think we'll stop there. Will we not, Jan? And any hands waving? Okay. Well,
Sounds good. Sorry. I just created a YouTube channel for you.
turn it over to Jan. We'll do another one.
I just created a YouTube channel for you, so we'll put that up, and then people can go to your new YouTube channel, The Teachings of Father Terry Ryan. How's that?
Is that on the chat?
I'm going to put it up in a second. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming, for being available. And this has been recorded,
Yeah.
and it can be accessed in a second. Jan's putting it up there on YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you want to listen to something again, you want to tell somebody, if you can't remember any of this, just tell them, well, send them an email, or if you're on Mary Baumgartner's list, I'll send it out to her, and so on and so forth. We'll get the word out. And Jan and I will do another one of these down the road some, since we don't have to drive anywhere. We don't have to rent space in a hall. And this COVID thing's going to be going on for a while, so I think we're going to be Zooming and YouTubing, but still, it's a chance. And thank you very much. I'm going mute.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks,
Thank you.